5 West African leaders appeal for more international help in combating militant Islamists. Estranged wife of Zimbabwe's Vice President Constantino Chiwenga appears in court on charges of money laundering and fraud. And Liberia's Ministry of Education announces the closure of all government-run schools as teachers begin nationwide strike. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin this week with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
A Sudanese court on Saturday convicted former President Omar al-Bashir on charges of corruption and illicit possession of foreign currency and sentenced him to 2 years of detention in a reform facility. The presiding judge says the 75-year-old, who was ousted in April following months of street protest against his three-decade rule, was being sent to the reform facility rather than a prison on account of his age. He also ordered the confiscation of millions of euros and Sudanese pounds found in Bashir's residence when he was toppled. Bashir is also wanted by the International Criminal Court, which issued warrant arrests against him in 2009 and 2010 on charges of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in Sudan's Darfur region. The leaders of the G5 Sahel countries on Sunday visited the graves of 71 Niger soldiers killed in the western town of Inait, days earlier in the worst jihadist attack on security forces in Niger. Islamist militants killed the soldiers in an attack on a remote military camp in Niger near the border with Mali on Tuesday, December the 10th, in an attack claimed by the Islamic State. The Friday before, Niger honored fallen soldiers during a ceremony at an airbase in the capital, Niamey. The president of the G5 Sahel group, made up of Mali, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania, met in Niamey for an extraordinary session of the group of nations whose multinational military forces are fighting Islamist insurgents. In his first public comment, Algeria's president-elect, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, says that he will start consultations on drawing up a new constitution that will be put to Algerians in a referendum. He offered a dialogue to the opposition mass protest movement, saying that he will institute reforms to reduce spending on imports and promised to open a new page for Algeria. But the protesters marching in Algiers see him as beholden to the same shadowy military-backed elite that had ruled Algeria for decades and quickly rejected his victory. South Africa's radical leftist economic freedom fighters, EFF party, hosted a conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, on Saturday to elect their new leaders and discuss policies, as the government called a state of emergency over the country's stuttering power supply. EFF leader Julius Malema told delegates their party would protect South Africa's state utility provider, Eskom, in its entirety from privatization, after President Cyril Ramaphosa met with industry figures on Friday to discuss options to ease the power crunch.
Eskom is in crisis. We want Eskom in its entirety, from generation, transmission and distribution, to be owned by the state.
Eskom is choking under a massive 450 billion rand, that's about $30.60 billion debt. It says that the country desperately needs an additional 5,000 megawatts of generating capacity.
To our main stories now, 5 West African leaders are appealing for greater international help to combat militant Islamists. This appeal follows the killing of 71 soldiers in Niger. Niger's President Mahamadou Issoufou said the militants had become professionals in the art of war. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack on a military base in western Niger. Last week's attack in Niger's western town in Yates was described as the deadliest raid against the Nigerian military in living memory. The G5 Sahel countries have a counterinsurgency force supported by 4,500 French troops to fight the militants. It was launched 4 years ago when almost all the attacks by the Islamist militants were in Mali. To southern Africa now, the estranged wife of Zimbabwe's vice president has been charged with attempting to murder him. Mary Mubaiwa, who is already facing corruption charges, has been denied bail in Harare. It is alleged that she tried to kill General Constantino Chiwenga while he was receiving medical treatment in South Africa. The fraud charges come from an alleged attempt to forge a marriage certificate without her husband's consent while he was sick. The couple was customarily married in 2011. The case is presented as proof of the country's new commitment to clean governance after the misrule of the Mugabe era. Now let's get more on this story from Zimbabwean journalist Nigel Mutumbo. Hello Nigel, thank you very much for joining us. Now local media says the fraud charges come from an alleged attempt by Miss Mary to forge a marriage certificate without her husband's consent. Help us understand what that is all about.
Always a pleasure being here. Well, the story involving the wife of Zimbabwe's vice president, Constantino Chiwenga, keeps taking interesting turns to the extent that the conversation in Zimbabwe right now among pundits and political commentators has been that of trying to establish exactly what she has done wrong. Because initially, when she was arrested over the weekend, she had 6 counts of money laundering. She had another further 3 counts of externalization and another count of fraud, which involves her trying to forge a marriage with, to civilize a marriage with a vice president without his consent and knowledge. So, well, it's really still an unfolding story, but the latest from Harare being that she has been remanded in custody until the 30th of December.
Right. I assume Zimbabweans are watching this closely. What has been the comments from citizens about this?
The conversations in Zimbabwe are really varied, with some saying, well, it's not really an important story. It is just a divorce sideshow between Vice President Chiwenga and his wife. That has nothing to do with the livelihood of the people of Zimbabwe. We also have women's groups, gender activists also siding with Mary Chiwenga, that she is actually being victimized due to a gender, and that it also speaks to the struggles that generally women in this country go through. There have been quite a bit of deliberation on whether this is anything to do with the fight against corruption in Zimbabwe, or it is one of those political sideshows that will not still yield any form of justice, retribution, or any form of truth whatsoever. So we wait to see.
Okay, Nigel, finally, before I let you go, what is likely to be the consequence if she is convicted of this charge and murder charge?
Well, if she is convicted of, on all accounts, I mean, one would imagine that she is going to pretty much spend the rest of her life in prison. particularly the one around attempted murder, and also the one around externalization, fraud, and money laundering. But if she, is to be convicted on one of the counts, who knows? Especially the one that are of a monetary nature, she may, yes, get imprisonment for a couple of years, and she may be requested to make provisions of returning the money and so on. But yeah, it's really yet to be clear on what punishment she will likely to face if she is convicted.
Yes, thank you very much, Nigel Mutumbo there, speaking to us from Harare. Now, officials in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo say at least 22 people have been killed during a rebel attack on Saturday night in a village near Beni City. It is thought to have been carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces. The Congolese military recently launched an offensive against the rebels, but this has prompted more attacks against civilians. The suspected ADF rebels armed with machetes and guns attacked a village called Ntombi on Saturday night. Local officials say they are still searching for more bodies in the surrounding area of people who had tried to get away. The rebel group that originated in Uganda over 2 decades ago and now has no clear political agenda has been attacking many villages in North Kivu province. A Ugandan marine officer has drowned as he tried to rescue a civilian in the floods. Local media says Sergeant Godfrey Wanda, a marine officer with the Uganda People's Defense Forces, was among 5 people who were washed away by floods in Kampala. The officer was swept away while on the mission and his body recovered at Mbuya Katugo Swamp. Heavy rains continue to pound East Africa, with hundreds reported to have died and thousands displaced. Meanwhile, a mass burial ceremony has been conducted for 20 people that perished following landslides in Burundi. It was attended by friends, family, and officials. Officials say at least 7 people were also injured during the December 4 disaster. All the victims were living on a hillside which gave way at night after heavy rains. The government has also pledged to help survivors.
Relatives, friends, neighbors and officials gather to conduct a mass burial ceremony for the victims of the Burundi landslide. At least 26 people were killed and 7 injured on December 4. All the victims were living on a hillside which gave way at night after heavy rains. The burials took place in the hillside village of Mugina, with the government pledging to help survivors by moving them to more stable ground while also calling for aid.
We want to find a place as soon as possible, a safe place where your community and village can live. But government cannot do it alone. We're appealing to everyone who can help in any way to kindly do so.
East Africa is experiencing unreasonably heavy rains because the Indian Ocean is warmer than usual, partly as a result of a cyclical weather phenomenon and partly because oceans are warming up. According to the United Nations report, flooding has also displaced nearly 500,000 people in southern Sudan, 200,000 in Ethiopia, and at least 370,000 in Somalia this year alone.
Now, still to come on the program. One of Nigeria's leading television station, Channels Television, wins Best TV Station of the Year for the 13th time. Please stay with us.